Good afternoon, everyone. So let us start this class on my reminiscences, and I will again try to share the screen with you. So we were doing this text, my reminiscences, as you can see, and we had begun in the first chapter. We had done the first chapter, and now we are into the second one, into the second chapter, which is titled Teaching Begins. And we were reading about this person called Kailash, who was a great wit, and Rabindranath describes him as a person who was always in a very witty kind of a mood, and he used to make fun of uh, the recently married sons-in-laws and the newcomers into the family circle. So once my elders were engaged in an attempt to start a postal service with the other world by means of a planchet. So as you know, a planchet is a process which was quite popular during Tagore's time, and that was a process through which one could supposedly establish contact with the souls of people who have passed away. Now, at one of the sittings, the pencil scrawled out the name of Kailash. He was asked as to the sort of life one led where he was. Not a bit of it, was the reply. Why should you get so cheap what I had to die to learn? So, uh, even after death, Kailash was as witty as ever as he had been when he was alive, and he positively refused to disclose whatever he knew. This Kailash used to rattle off for my special delectation a doggerel ballad of his own composition. So he was a kind of a poet also, and he used to entertain the boy Rabindranath with his own composition. Doggerel is actually a kind of a comic verse of inferior quality with uh, irregular rhythm. The hero was myself, and there was a glowing anticipation of the arrival of a heroine. So, in that poem, which Kailash used to recite for the boy poet, actually, Rabindranath was the hero there, and there was the possibility of a arrival of a heroine also. And as I listened, my interest would wax intense at the picture of this world-charming bride illuminating the lap of the future in which she sat enthroned. So, obviously, Rabindranath was very interested in this picture of a bride who would appear in the poem. The list of the jewelry with which she was bedecked from head to foot, and the unheard of splendor of the preparations for the bridal might have turned older and wiser heads, but what moved the boy and set wonderful joy pictures flitting before his vision was the rapid jingle of the frequent rhymes and the swing of the rhythm. So it was a very the picture was of this bride with a lot of jewelry uh, uh, on her body, and she uh, there was this picture of a bridal, the possibility of a very lavish kind of a bridal preparation that was there in this poem, which Kailash used to recite. And obviously, uh, Rabindranath, as a boy, he was very interested in this picture. And the rhyme of the poem, the rapid jingle of the frequent rhymes, and the swing of the rhythm were the things were which appealed to him. These two literary delights still linger in my memory. And there is the other, the infant's classic. The rain falls pit a pat, the tide comes up the river. So the first was this, of course, how uh, he remembers the rhyme uh, that has been explained or referred to here. The rain patters, the leaf quivers, and then this incident about Kailash, which he remembers, and there is this the reference to this infant's classic. The rain falls Peter Pat, the tide comes up the river, which was familiar, quite a uh, classic of children, which children used to read. And the Bengali version we have all come across, and that is Brishti Pore Tapur Tupur Node Elo Ban. So that is the Bengali version. The next thing I remember is the beginning of my school life. One day I saw my elder brother and my sister's son, Shotto, also a little older than myself, starting off to school, leaving me behind, accounted unfit. So this is the account of how Rabindranath, uh, as a boy, he started to go to school, and this started like this, in this way, that his elder brother, uh, his elder brother's name has not been mentioned, and his sister's son, Shotto, who was a little older than himself, they were going to school, and because he was not old enough to go to school, um, he was left behind. I had never before ridden in a carriage, nor even been out of the house. So the little Rabindranath had not gone outside, and he had always remained inside the house. And he had not even taken a ride in a carriage. So when Shotto came back, full of unduly glowing accounts of his adventures on the way, I felt I simply could not stay at home. So this person called this boy Shotto, he came back from school on the first day, and he gave a very uh, rosy picture of his adventures. And obviously, the little boy, that is little poet, uh, he was really eager to go to school. Our tutor tried to dispel my illusion with sound advice and a resounding slap. You are trying to go to school now. You will have to cry a lot more to be let off later on. So that was really a sound advice. And the boy Rabindranath, he did not know that uh, school was something that no child wanted to go to, because he had heard uh, about school in a different way from Shotto. So his tutor also was, of course, he knew that uh, Rabindranath would soon start to dislike school, and he gave him a sound slap and a piece of advice. I have no recollection of the name, features, or disposition of this tutor of ours, but the impression of his weighty advice and weightier hand has not yet faded. So Rabindranath says, in a kind of a humorous vein, that though I do not remember this tutor's name or how he looked like, but the weight of his advice and his weightier hand, that is the slap that he had received, those two things still they are there in my mind. Never in my life have I heard a truer prophecy. So this is really a funny incident. Uh, he is saying now that he is grown up, he can understand the real, the value of that advice which that tutor had given him. My crying drove me prematurely into the Oriental Seminary. So this is the first school that Rabindranath went to. So we have to remember these small, details. What I learned there, I have no idea, but one of its methods of punishment I still bear in mind. So he was too young to sort of, remember the lessons that he had received there in the Oriental Seminary, but he remembered the punishments, the methods. The boy who was unable to repeat his lessons was made to stand on a bench with arms extended, and on his upturned palms were piled a number of slates. So this was the punishment. The boy would have to stand on the bench and he would have to extend his arms with where the slates would be placed. So obviously that would be a very painful punishment. It is for psychologists to debate how far this method is likely to conduce to a better grasp of things. I thus began my schooling at an extremely tender age. So Rabindranath is saying that I am not sure whether this kind of punishment would was really effective in making the boys remember their lessons or made them study harder, but the psychologists would be able to explain better. And this is the beginning of his schooling. It was at a very young age. My initiation into literature had its origin at the same time in the books which were in vogue in the servants' quarters. Chief among these were a Bengali translation of Chanakya's aphorisms and the Ramayana of Krittibash. So these were the two books. And as we all know that Rabindranath as a boy was brought up mainly by the servants. Um, and there is in this book a whole chapter on the servants, how they used to lord over the boys. So Rabindranath's initiation into literature that began there, and Chanakya's aphorisms. Chanakya, as you know, he is a famous uh, politician, kind of a minister, and he has a number of aphorisms, which were, of course, originally in Sanskrit, and the Bengali translation was there, which Rabindranath uh, heard about, and the Ramayana of Krittibash, that was also another famous book during those times. A picture of one day's reading of the Ramayana comes clearly back to me. The day was a cloudy one. I was playing about in the long veranda overlooking the road. All of a sudden, Shotto, for some reason I do not remember, wanted to frighten me by shouting, "Policeman, policeman!" My ideas of the duties of policemen were of an extremely vague description. One thing I was certain about, that a person charged with crime, once placed in a policeman's hands, would, as sure as the wretch caught in a crocodile's serrated grip, go under and be seen no more. So the young boy, he did not have a clear idea of the duties of policemen, but he knew that if one were so unfortunate enough to land into the hands of a policeman, he would disappear. So Shotto wanted to frighten Rabindranath, and he actually started shouting that a policeman was coming. Not knowing how an innocent boy could escape this relentless penal code, I bolted towards the inner apartments, with shudders running down my back for blind fear of pursuing policemen. So he was really in a panic. He wanted to run away to the inner apartments. I broke to my mother the news of my impending doom, but it did not seem to disturb her much. So he went straight to his mother and told her that a policeman was coming to nab him. However, of course, his mother knew that it was not going to happen, and she was not at all perturbed. However, not deeming it safe to venture out again, I sat down on the sill of my mother's door to read the dog-eared Ramayana with a marbled paper cover, which belonged to her old aunt. So he decided not to venture out again, because if he went out, then he might be caught by that policeman. And so what he started to do, he started to read that. Dog-eared means it is a kind of a worn out kind of a book, uh, and it was marked. The corners were marked. Alongside stretched the veranda, running round the four sides of the open inner quadrangle, on which had fallen the faint afternoon glow of the clouded sky. And finding me weeping over one of its sorrowful situations, my great aunt came and took away the book from me. So he came upon a passage where most probably it was a sorrowful description, and he started to cry, and this made his great aunt to take the book away from him. So here chapter number 2 comes to an end, and this is schooling begins, like that, teaching begins. And here we come to know about how uh, his schooling started, some facts about this person called Kailash, and how Shotto played a prank uh, on him, and what were the books that he started reading. Now let us move on to chapter number 3, within and without. And the last chapter also, we have to remember the name of the school, Oriental Seminary. So that was the first school where Rabindranath was admitted. Now let us read this chapter, within and without. Luxury was a thing almost unknown in the days of my infancy. The standard of living was then, as a whole, much more simple than it is now. Apart from that, the children of our household were entirely free from the fuss of being too much looked after. The fact is that, while the process of looking after may be an occasional treat for the guardians, to the children it is always an unmitigated nuisance. So Rabindranath here, he is saying that he was, though he belonged to a well-to-do family, he was not brought he was not really pampered. That is what he is saying. And the standard of living was much simpler, and the children, they were not fussed over. In fact, they were occasionally looked after by the guardians, not always, and they were most of the times left to their own inclinations, as it were. And he's saying that the children, actually, if they are looked after always and they are fussed over, then it becomes a kind of a nuisance for them. We used to be under the rule of the servants. So here we get the description. To save themselves trouble, they had almost suppressed our right of free movement. but the freedom of not being petted made up even for the harshness of this bondage. For our minds were left clear of the toils of constant uh, coddling, pampering, and dressing up. So the servants actually, they did not allow the children to roam here and there, because it was a large house, and if the children were allowed to move about here and there, then it would be difficult for them to keep an eye on them. So they allowed them limited uh, movement. Uh, However, Rabindranath is saying that they were not being petted, not being fussed over, and this bondage, that they were not allowed to move freely, that didn't appear light to them, because they were not pampered, coddled, and not dressed up uh, by the servants. So this was something which happened in the early part of their lives. Our food had nothing to do with delicacies. A list of our articles of clothing would only invite the modern boy's scorn. So food and clothing, they were minimal. On no pretext did we wear socks or shoes till we had passed our 10th year. So this is really surprising, that they did not wear socks or shoes until they were almost 10 years old. In the cold weather, sorry, in the cold weather, a second cotton tunic over the first one, over the first one sufficed. So as you can see here, that uh, the dress that the boys wore, that was also not really of the standard to which they belonged. It never entered our heads to consider ourselves ill off for that reason. It was only when old Niyamat, the tailor, would forget to put a pocket into one of our tunics that we complained. For no boy has yet been born so poor as not to have the wherewithal to stuff his pockets. So the old tailor, whose name was Niyamat, sometimes he used to forget to put uh, pockets into the tunics, and that would really be a cause of complaint, because generally what happened, the boys put a lot of things, playthings, into their pockets. Nor by a merciful dispensation of providence is there much difference between the wealth of boys of rich and of poor parentage. So boys, both coming from rich families and poor families, they had more or less uh, kind of same possessions. We used to have a pair of slippers each, but not always where we had our feet. Our habit of kicking the slippers on ahead and catching them up again made them work nonetheless hard, through effectually defeating at the very step the reason of their being. So they used to play about with their slippers, not wear them. Our elders were in every way at a great distance from us, in their dress and food, living and doing, conversation and amusement. So they had a different world altogether, the elders. We caught glimpses of these, but they were beyond our reach. Elders have become cheap to modern children. They are too readily accessible, and so are all objects of desire. So Rabindranath is thinking of the present time when he was writing these memoirs, and he says that modern children actually they are looked after their elders in a kind of a they are pampered, and whatever they want they are getting. Nothing ever came so easily to us. Many a trivial thing was for us a rarity, and we lived mostly in the hope of attaining, when we were old enough, the things which the distant future held in trust for us. So uh, the children, they were not given gifts, too many gifts. So if they wanted something, uh, they were not really given those things. And even trivial things, uh, cheap things, they rarely got, and they only could hope of getting them. The result was that what little we did get, we enjoyed to the utmost. From skin to core, nothing was thrown away. The modern child of a well-to-do family nibbles at only half the things he gets. The greater part of his world is wasted on him. So this is a kind of a criticism that Tagore makes here, that the modern child is pampered too much, and it is applicable even now. So, and they get so many things that they cannot enjoy fully uh, everything that they get, and most of the things are wasted. Our days were spent in the servants' quarters in the southeast corner of the outer apartments. One of our servants was Sham, a dark, chubby boy with curly locks, hailing from the district of Khulna. So this is the description of the servant called Sham. He would put me into a selected spot and, tracing a chalk line all round, warn me with solemn face and uplifted finger of the perils of transgressing this ring. So kind of a Lakshman Rekha, as we call it. So he would have one kind of method of keeping Tagore inside that circle. He would warn him not to come out. Whether the threatened danger was material or spiritual, I never fully understood, but a great fear used to possess me. I had read in the Ramayana of the tribulations of Sita for having left the ring drawn by Lakshman, so it was not possible for me to be skeptical of its potency. So obviously, the story, as we know, about how Sita had transgressed that Lakshman Rekha and what happened to her, that story was there for Tagore to fall back upon, and therefore he, as a boy, could not really disobey this person Sham's directives. Just below the window of this room was a tank with a flight of masonry steps leading down into the water. On its west bank, along the garden wall, an immense banyan tree. So from Tagore's room, there was he could see a tank, that is a small pond with a flight of masonry steps leading down into the water. And on the west bank, there was a very big, huge banyan tree. To the south, a fringe of coconut palms. So this is the outer world. We had been reading about the inner world, about the house, and how uh, as a child Tagore was used to spend his time inside, and now he what he could see outside from the window of the room. Ringed round as I was near this window, I would spend the whole day peering through the drawn Venetian shutters, gazing and gazing on this scene as on a picture book. So the boy, as we know that he was not allowed to go out, so obviously as a child, he had a lot of curiosity as to what was there beyond the house, and he used to stare on the scene. From early morning, our neighbors would drop in one by one to have their bath. So in that tank, the people of the locality, they used to come and bathe. I knew the time for each one to arrive. I was familiar with the peculiarities of each one's toilet. So the boy used to observe them from the window. One would stop up his ears with his fingers as he took his regulation number of dips, after which he would depart. So different people had different ways of bathing. One person would stop his ears so that the water would not enter his ears, and he would take his regulation number of dips, and then he would go away. Another would not venture on a complete immersion but be content with only squeezing his wet towel repeatedly over his head. So another person would not go down into the water, but he would uh, squeeze water from the towel, uh, placing it over his head. A third would carefully drive the surface impurities away from him with a rapid play of his arms, and then on a sudden impulse take his plunge. So he would try to uh, throw away the impurities with his uh, arms, and then suddenly take a kind of a quick plunge. There was one who jumped in from the top steps without any preliminaries at all. So that was another way another person used to bathe. Another would walk slowly in, step by step, muttering his morning prayers the while. One was always in a hurry, hastening home as soon as he was through with his dip. Another was in no sort of hurry at all, taking his bath leisurely, followed with a good rub down, and a change from wet bathing clothes into clean ones, including a careful adjustment of the folds of his waistcloth, ending with a turn or two in the outer garden and the gathering of flowers, with which he would finally saunter slowly homewards, radiating the cool comfort of his refreshed body as he went. So the difference in the attitude of these people. One person was very busy. Actually, he did not have time to take a lengthy bath. So he would go away immediately after finishing his bath in a hurried way. But another person, as Tagore observed him, he would have a lot of time. He would take his time to bathe, and then he would roam around here and there, and he would put on new clothes, new that is fresh clothes, and then he would go about here and there in the garden and gather some flowers, and after that go home. This would go on till it was past noon, so after 12 p.m. So right from the morning till 12 p.m. Then the bathing places would be deserted and become silent. Only the ducks remained, paddling about after water snails or busy preening their feathers the livelong day. So now the pond would be taken over by the ducks, and uh, people would stop coming. So this is the scene what Tagore used to observe from his uh, window. When solitude thus reigned over the water, my whole attention would be drawn to the shadows under the banyan tree. Now he would look at the shadows in the under the banyan tree. Some of its aerial roots creeping down along its trunk that formed a dark complication of coils at its base. It seemed as if into this mysterious region the laws of the universe had not found entrance, as if some old world dreamland had escaped the divine vigilance and lingered on into the light of modern day. So this was the place, the base of the trunk, and as you know, the banyan tree has its some of the roots that are there above the ground, and it was a huge banyan tree and quite old, uh, and therefore the little boy felt that it was really a mysterious place, and the laws of the world would not find entrance there, and it was like a dreamland. Whom I used to see there, and what those beings did, it is not possible to express in intelligible language. So what the images came to the boy's mind, that was, of course, he does not remember, and he would not be able to uh, explain. It was about this banyan tree that I wrote later. So there is a poem that Tagore wrote about this banyan tree, and it runs like this: with tangled roots hanging down from your branches, O ancient banyan tree, you stand still day and night like an ascetic at his penances. Do you ever remember the child whose fancy played with your shadows? So Tagore, when he grew older, he wrote this poem, and the Bengali version, uh, it runs like this: নিশি দিশি দাঁড়িয়ে আছো মাথায় লয়ে জট ছোট ছেলেটি মনে কি পড়ে ওগো প্রাচীন বট. So these are the two lines that have been translated here. So uh, he was addressing this old banyan tree. Alas, that banyan tree is no more, nor the piece of water which served to mirror the majestic forest lord. So, with the passage of time, that tree was destroyed, and the tank or that pond was also not there anymore. Many of those who used to bathe there have also followed into oblivion, the shade of the banyan tree. So the people who used to come there, uh, they, of course, they have disappeared. And that boy, grown older, is counting the alternations of light and darkness which penetrate the complexities with which the roots he has thrown off on all sides have encircled him. So the little boy who used to observe all these things, he is now a grown-up person. And the alternations of light and darkness. So things have changed, and the complexities of life have engulfed him. So at that point of time, the life that the little boy lived was a simple life. But after growing up, this has changed altogether, and the scene also has changed. So life's complexities have encircled him, as he says here. So this is the picture of what he used to see from his window, and how these people used to bathe there. So the peculiarities of each person. And he was really little, Tagore was very observant. He used to observe each of their the different ways in which they used to bathe there. Going out of the house was forbidden to us. In fact, we had not even the freedom of all its parts. So the children, they were not allowed to go out, and also they did not have the right or the freedom to go to all the parts of the house. We perforce took our peeps at nature from behind the barriers. Beyond my reach there was this limitless thing called the outside, of which flashes and sounds and scents used momentarily to come and touch me through its interstices. So the connection with the outside world was through pips, and it happened very rarely, and the sounds and scents of the outside world would come occasionally, and this limitless thing called the outside. So the outside was beckoning him, and like every child, he was curious. He was curious to know what was there outside. It seemed to want to play with me through the bars with so many gestures. So the outside world was a mystery, but it was free and I was bound. There was no way of meeting. So the boy was confined to this house, while the outside world had no limits. So the attraction was all the stronger. The chalk line has been wiped away today, but the confining ring is still there. So that chalk line that was drawn by this servant called Sham, that is no longer there. But as Tagore feels that the ring is still there, the distant is just as distant. The outside is still beyond me. And I am reminded of the poem I wrote when I was older. So here again we are, Tagore refers to this poem. And this is another famous poem which Tagore had written. The tame bird was in a cage, the free bird was in the forest. They met when the time came. It was a decree of fate. The free bird cries, "O my love, let us fly to wood." The cage bird whispers, "Come hither, let us both live in the cage." So this is a poem that Tagore wrote later. খাঁচার পাখি ছিল, খাঁচাটিতে বনের পাখি ছিল বনে. So it begins like this. So how they met one day, and the forest bird actually wanted the tame bird to come out of its cage, while the cage bird wanted the forest bird to come inside the cage. Says the free bird, "Among birds, where is there room to spread one's wings?" "Alas," cries the cage bird, "I should not know where to sit perched in the sky." So each one is actually, as we can see here, accustomed to its place of living. So the tame bird which lives in a cage, it is comfortable there. It does not know what it would do if it were released. While the free bird which lives in the forest, obviously it would die if it were to be confined. So this is the kind of situation that Tagore was in. The parapets of our terraced roofs were higher than my head. When I had grown taller, when the tyranny of the servants had relaxed, when with the coming of a newly married bride into the house, I had achieved some recognition as a companion of her leisure, then did I sometimes come up to the terrace in the middle of the day. So when Tagore grew up a bit and the servants were not so tyrannical in their behavior, and the arrival of a new bride into the house. So one of his elder brothers, most probably he is referring to Jyotirindranath Tagore and his wife Kadambari Devi. I had achieved some recognition as a companion of her leisure. Then did I sometimes come up to the terrace in the middle of the day. By that time, everybody in the house would have finished their meal. There would be an interval in the business of the household. Over the inner apartments would rest the quiet of the midday siesta. The wet bedding clothes would be hanging over the parapets to dry. The crows would be picking at the leavings thrown on the refuse heap at the corner of the yard. In the solitude of that interval, the caged bird would, through the gaps in the parapet, commune bill to bill with the free bird. So he found a little bit of freedom when he had grown up, and he would be able to, during the afternoon, during the late afternoon when everyone had finished eating and the household was quiet, he would come up to the terrace, and he would look into the outside world, and he would somehow or the other communicate with the outside world. So he is referring to himself as the caged bird, the bird which was confined to this house, who was not allowed to go outside. So we will stop here today with this description, and how, as we see in this chapter, there is this description of Tagore's, uh, how he, as a young boy, he used to see the world, the outside world, from his room, and what he saw there. And it was a picture which was enticing, that was mysterious. He wanted to communicate, he wanted to go out, but obviously uh, the rules and regulations of the Tagore household uh, were such that the young children, they were not allowed to go out and not to move about freely in the house. Only a little later, when he had grown up, he could, though he did not still go out of the house as such, as he has described, he could look at the outside world in a more, slightly more free way.